The
Yes, he's right
city
here.
pulsed with restless
Get him out of my
energy
sight,
that
now!
Friday evening. From the glowing marquees on Broadway to the rhythmic honking of taxis jostling for space, Manhattan was a kaleidoscope of wealth, ambition, and noise. The Grand Royale Hotel stood like a crown jewel in the middle of it all, its gilded awnings stretching over the sidewalk, catching the last light of the sunset. Chauffeurs held open doors for guests dripping in couture, and valets in crisp uniforms whisked away luxury cars, engines purring as they disappeared into the underground garage. Inside, the hotel was a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers poured light over veined marble floors, and the air smelled faintly of imported lilies and aged champagne. The Grand Royale was not a place people came to stay, it was a place they came to be seen. Into this palace of opulence walked Darnell Crawford, a man who understood both the allure and the emptiness of such spaces. At 52, he was the embodiment of ambition fulfilled, tall, broad-shouldered, and poised, dressed in a tailored navy suit that fit like a second skin. His silver cufflinks glinted as he adjusted his tie, his movements precise and unhurried. To anyone watching, he looked like he belonged. Yet, beneath the confidence, there lingered the faintest whisper of old memories. Memories of being told as a child in Detroit that he would never escape the cracked sidewalks and shuttered factories, that men who looked like him were destined for survival, not greatness. But Darnell had refused that script. Over 3 decades, he had built Crawford Global Technologies from a struggling mid-sized firm into a multinational powerhouse revolutionizing manufacturing systems across 3 continents. Tonight, he was hours away from closing a $4.9 billion merger with a European conglomerate. The deal would dominate headlines, cement his status among the most influential executives in the world, and position his company as an undisputed leader in advanced industrial solutions. Yet, the thought of celebration felt hollow. What mattered to him was not the money, it was the symbolism. It was the proof that a black man from Detroit could not only play the game, but change it. His European counterparts had been delayed in traffic, and while he waited for them to arrive in the rooftop suite, Darnell drifted toward the hotel bar. The bar was a study in understated extravagance, mahogany counters polished to a mirror sheen, shelves lined with rare whiskeys and brandies, soft leather stools where patrons sat in designer clothes, whispering about stocks, politics, and private islands. Darnell settled onto a stool at the corner, nodding to the bartender. "A glass of Macallan, 18-year," he said, his voice calm, controlled. The bartender, a young man with slick-back hair and a pressed vest, gave a curt nod and poured the amber liquid into a crystal glass. Darnell slid a sleek black card across the counter without thinking. The American Express Centurion, the fabled black card. To the wealthy elite, it was more than plastic, it was a symbol. No limit, no denials, no questions. Except tonight. The bartender picked up the card, turning it between his fingers with a puzzled frown. His lips curved into something between a sneer and a smirk. "Sir," he said slowly, his tone laced with skepticism, "are you sure this is yours?" Darnell looked up from his phone, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" The bartender lifted the card slightly higher, as if to display it to the entire bar. "This card," he continued, "isn't exactly common. We get people trying to pass off fakes all the time. You understand what I mean, right? We have to be careful with situations like this." The words were daggers dressed as courtesy. Around them, the air shifted. Conversation slowed. A woman in a diamond necklace glanced sideways, whispering something to her companion. A man in a tailored suit chuckled under his breath. In seconds, the entire bar seemed to vibrate with silent judgment. Darnell felt his jaw tighten. He had lived this moment 100 times in 100 different ways. The raised eyebrows at private airports, the lingering glances when he walked into a boardroom, the questions that started not with "what do you do?" but "who do you work for?" He had trained himself to respond with dignity, to use composure as armor. But this was different. This was not subtle. This was an accusation, public, humiliating, undeniable. "Run the card," Darnell said, evenly, his voice low but firm. The bartender shook his head and chuckled as if humoring a child. "Look, I don't want any trouble. Maybe just use something else. A regular credit card. Or cash. Heat surged through Darnell's chest. His hand gripped the counter. He could feel eyes drilling into him, some curious, others mocking. He leaned forward slightly, his imposing frame suddenly towering over the bartender. That card, he said, voice sharp, could buy this entire hotel twice over. Now, either you process the payment or I'll speak to your manager. The bartender rolled his eyes dramatically, muttering, "Don't make a scene. It's embarrassing." The insult echoed louder than the clinking of glasses. Guests began whispering audibly now. A young man near the corner discreetly raised his phone, recording. The bartender finally slid the card into machine, but before the receipt printed, a manager appeared. She was petite with a sharp bob haircut and a crimson blazer that screamed authority. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her gaze flicking between the bartender and Darnell. "Yes," Darnell replied without hesitation. "Your employee just questioned whether I could possibly own this card." The manager gave a tight smile, the kind that carried no warmth. "Well, sir, you have to understand, we don't see many situations like this. I'm sure he was just being cautious." Situations like this. The phrase lodged in Darnell's chest like a stone. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't acknowledging the insult. She was excusing it, rationalizing it, reducing his humanity to a situation. Darnell picked up the untouched glass of scotch, placed it firmly back on the counter, and retrieved his card. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence was heavier than any outburst could have been. He turned, buttoned his jacket with deliberate precision, and walked out of the bar. Behind him, the murmurs swelled again, some sympathetic, others dismissive, but none of them mattered. What mattered was the familiar weight pressing against his shoulders, the weight of humiliation, sharper than ever because it came at the very moment he should have been celebrated. Minutes later, Darnell entered the rooftop suite where his European counterparts awaited. The space was immaculate, with panoramic views of the skyline glowing against the night. Klaus, the silver-haired lead negotiator, rose to greet him with a warm smile. "Ah, Darnell, at last. Shall we make history tonight?" The men around the table clapped, their excitement palpable. But Darnell's demeanor had shifted. The confidence and lightness that had colored their earlier conversations were gone. He was distant, distracted. He shook hands mechanically, his thoughts replaying the sneer of the bartender, the hollow smile of the manager, the word situation echoing in his mind. Klaus extended his hand once more, his voice booming with optimism. "To progress, to partnership, and to prosperity. Let us finalize this merger." Darnell paused. He thought about the years of negotiations, the billions at stake, the analysts waiting to write tomorrow's headlines. But then he thought about what had just transpired downstairs, about how, in a place designed to honor wealth and power, he had been reduced to suspicion, about how easily his dignity had been dismissed. "No," he said quietly but firmly. Klaus blinked, startled. "No, I don't understand." "This deal," Darnell said, rising to his full height, his voice steady as steel, "was supposed to symbolize progress. But I will not build a future where respect can be bought, but dignity is still denied. Gentlemen, the deal is off." The room froze. Lawyers gasped. Assistants scrambled to their phones. Within seconds, a $4.9 billion deal disintegrated into nothingness. Klaus stammered, trying to salvage the situation, but Darnell was already walking away, his phone vibrating with calls he refused to answer. As he descended the marble staircase of the Grand Royale, the noise of the world blurred into a dull hum. The only sound that mattered was the echo of his footsteps, a steady, unshaken rhythm. In those footsteps lay a declaration. Some moments, however costly, are worth everything. The story broke the next morning like a tidal wave, unstoppable and unforgiving. Black CEO cancels $4.9 billion deal after humiliation at luxury hotel, blared the digital front pages of financial news sites. Humiliation at the Grand Royale sparks billion-dollar fallout, echoed television anchors. By noon, hashtags like hashtag Black Card Incident and hashtag Dignity Over Dollars were trending across Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On TikTok, the grainy footage captured by a guest at the bar, showing the bartender holding Darnell's Centurion card with a sneer, was replayed millions of times, stitched into reaction videos, analysis threads, and fiery debates about race, privilege, and power. For some, Darnell's decision was the epitome of courage. This man sacrificed billions to stand on principle, one commentator wrote. That's leadership. Civil rights activists praised him for shining a light on the insidious ways prejudice lingers, even in places designed for the elite. Parents shared the story with their children, framing it as a lesson in dignity. A viral tweet from a college student summed up the sentiment. He didn't just cancel a deal. He reminded the world that our humanity isn't for sale. But others were far less kind. Market analysts and business pundits went on air, calling the decision reckless. Shareholders don't invest in feelings, one Wall Street veteran said sharply. They invest in returns. Crawford's pride just cost thousands of employees their security. Editorials questioned his judgment, suggesting his emotions had clouded rational decision-making. Anonymous voices online labeled him unstable, selfish, and too sensitive for high finance. Through it all, Darnell remained silent, except for a single statement his office released that afternoon. I will not build wealth in a world where my humanity is still up for debate. The sentence ricocheted across the internet, quoted in articles, printed on protest signs, repeated in boardrooms. To some, it was poetry. To others, it was evidence of arrogance. But to Darnell, it was simply the truth. Behind closed doors, however, the consequences were immediate and brutal. Crawford Global's stock dropped 12% in the first 2 days. Investors panicked, questioning whether the CEO they had trusted to steer billions was too unpredictable to continue leading. Rival companies whispered about exploiting the fallout, targeting Crawford Global's clients with promises of stability. Inside the skyscraper headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, tension hung like fog. The board of directors demanded an emergency meeting. The meeting was combative from the start. A dozen men and women sat around a gleaming mahogany table, papers shuffled angrily, voices sharp. One board member, a man with steel-rimmed glasses and decades of experience, leaned forward. You have cost this company billions, he snapped. Do you even understand the magnitude of what you've done? Yes, Darnell replied, simply, his hands clasped in front of him. Then why? Another board member pressed, exasperated. Darnell rose to his feet, his presence filling the room. He spoke slowly, deliberately, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge. Because our value as a company is not just in our balance sheets. It's in the principles we stand for. If we can't prove that dignity matters more than dollars, then we're not worth the fortune we're trying to build. Silence followed. Some board members shook their heads, incredulous. Others sat frozen, wrestling with the uncomfortable truth of his words. The debate raged for hours, but Darnell's resolve was immovable. He would not bend. While Wall Street fumed, something very different was happening outside its glass towers. Letters, emails, and phone calls flooded Crawford Global's offices, tens of thousands of them. A single mother in Atlanta wrote, "Thank you for showing my son that his dignity matters more than any paycheck." A retired teacher in Chicago said, "You stood tall for all of us who have been made to feel small." College students sent handwritten notes, calling him an inspiration. Activists organized rallies outside the Grand Royale. Crowds gathered with signs that read, "Respect is priceless and dignity over dollars." Civil rights leaders demanded accountability. Celebrities with millions of followers posted videos of support, vowing to never again step foot in the hotel. Pressure mounted until the Grand Royale had no choice but to act. Within a week, they issued a public apology, fired the bartender and manager, and announced mandatory diversity training for all employees. Still, the apology felt thin. The video had told the world what no press release could erase. In a palace built for the wealthy, even a billionaire black man could be treated like an imposter. The humiliation had been public, undeniable, and deeply symbolic. For many, the hotel's response only underscored how far the gap remained between words and justice. Meanwhile, Crawford Global's internal climate began to shift. At first, employees worried about layoffs, budget cuts, or a hostile takeover. But gradually, a different sentiment emerged. Workers saw their CEO refusing to bow to pressure, choosing integrity over profit. Many felt pride in being part of a company that valued humanity over numbers. A software engineer in San Francisco wrote anonymously on an internal forum, "For the first time, I feel like this isn't just a job, it's a statement." Investors, too, began to reevaluate. While some sold their shares, others, particularly younger, socially conscious investors, bought in, seeing Crawford Global as more than a corporation but a movement. Partnerships blossomed with minority-owned firms who wanted to align themselves with a company that had proven its commitment to equality. Government contracts followed, tied to new initiatives for equitable technology access. Slowly, the numbers began to rebound. The initial plunge reversed itself, and within 6 months, Crawford Global stock was stronger than before. Analysts who had once condemned Darnell now grudgingly admitted that his decision had cultivated a brand loyalty money couldn't buy. The Grand Royale, however, was not so fortunate. Once considered untouchable, the hotel found itself at the center of lawsuits, boycotts, and relentless scrutiny. Bookings dropped, conferences pulled out. Influencers who had once posed by its rooftop pool now avoided it, fearing backlash. No matter how many glossy advertisements they purchased, no matter how many celebrities they courted, the shadow of the black card incident clung to the hotel's reputation like a stain that would never wash out. Through it all, Darnell carried himself with the same quiet composure he always had. He never returned to the Grand Royale, never granted interviews to rehash the humiliation. To him, the matter was closed, not because it was small, but because it had already said everything that needed to be said. One night, months after the incident, he stood alone in his Manhattan office. The city glittered beneath him, skyscrapers glowing like constellations against the dark. He rested a hand against the glass, looking out over the streets where he had once walked as a struggling young entrepreneur. He thought of the humiliation, of the deal that had vanished, of the chaos that followed. And then he thought of his childhood, of the cracked sidewalks of Detroit, of the nights he lay awake, dreaming not just of being rich, but of being respected. The merger was gone, but something greater had emerged. His decision had transcended profit and loss, leaving behind a legacy of principle. In that moment, Darnell realized that he had achieved something even the billions could not buy. He had reminded the world, and himself, that dignity is priceless. The legacy of that night at the Grand Royale would outlast any contract. For years, perhaps generations, people would tell the story of the black CEO who canceled a $4.9 billion deal not out of weakness, but out of strength, the strength to say no when the world expected him to say yes. And in that legacy, Darnell found peace. Because in the end, wealth can be counted. But dignity? Dignity is infinite.